The quiet man in booth 7. The old diner sat at the edge of a quiet highway, surrounded by faded gas stations and forgotten truck stops. It was a place that barely showed up on maps anymore. The floors creaked with every step. The coffee tasted like burnt memories, and the waitresses wore tired smiles that hid entire lives behind their eyes. On most mornings, the few customers who came through were regulars, truckers, old men with nowhere else to be, and the occasional drifter looking for warmth in a cup. On this morning, however, something felt different. The bell above the diner door chimed softly, and a man walked in. His steps were calm, unhurried, and he wore a worn-out brown jacket, faded jeans, and a black t-shirt. He had long, slightly messy hair, a beard that looked like it had seen some winters, and eyes that carried 1,000 silent stories. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply nodded politely at the waitress, picked the farthest booth near the window, booth 7, and sat down, alone. The waitress, an older woman named Clara, brought him coffee without asking. She somehow knew he wasn't the kind who liked to be asked too many questions. "Cream and sugar's right there," she said softly, then left him alone. What Clara didn't know, what no one knew, was that the quiet man in booth 7 was Keanu Reeves. He hadn't come here to be seen. He hadn't come to escape the world or to find it. He had come for one simple reason: to remember something painful, something he could only face when everything around him was quiet. But that peace was about to be shattered, too. Police officers pulled into the diner parking lot in a black cruiser. One was tall, sharp-featured, and walked like he owned every room he stepped into. The other was younger, with nervous eyes and a badge that still felt new on his chest. They walked into the diner like they were looking for trouble, or maybe like they had already found it. Their eyes immediately scanned the room and landed on Keanu. The older officer's lips curled into a smirk. "Guy in the corner booth looks familiar, like he's hiding something." The younger cop hesitated. "You sure? He's just sitting there, not bothering anyone." "I know that look." The older one snapped. "Too calm, too quiet. Let's see what he's up to." They approached booth 7 slowly, like wolves circling something they didn't understand. Keanu looked up, met their eyes, and gave a soft, respectful nod. "Good morning." But the older officer wasn't interested in pleasantries. "Morning," he replied coldly. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Keanu placed his coffee down gently. "Just having breakfast." "You from around here?" "No," he said simply. "Got any ID on you?" Keanu reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, a practiced movement that showed respect, not fear. He handed over his wallet without a word. The older officer snatched it, flipping through the contents without much care. Then he paused, his brows furrowed. Then his face shifted, almost like he was trying to decide if this was some kind of prank. "You expect me to believe this?" he scoffed. "Keanu Reeves, come on. What are you, some impersonator trying to get free coffee?" Keanu said nothing. He just took another sip of his coffee. The younger officer glanced at the ID, and then at Keanu. Something in his expression changed. He knew. He recognized the face not from posters or gossip, but from stories. Quiet ones, the kind that don't make headlines. Stories about a man who helped strangers in subways, gave away millions, stayed behind to clean up after filming while others walked away like kings. But the older cop wasn't interested in stories. He tossed the wallet back onto the table and leaned forward. "You want to tell me why you're really here?" Keanu looked up at him. His voice was soft, but there was strength behind it, the kind that didn't need to shout. "I'm here to remember someone I lost. This was her favorite diner." For a moment, the air grew still, but the older officer didn't care. "You got no business sitting here like you're better than the rest of us." Keanu shook his head. Slowly. "I don't think I'm better than anyone." "Yeah?" The cop sneered. "Then how about you get up and leave before I find a reason to arrest you?" The waitress, Clara, stepped in then. "Officer, please. He's not doing anything wrong." But the older cop turned on her like lightning. "Ma'am, stay out of this unless you want to spend your day explaining obstruction of justice." The younger cop shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should just let him be. He's not breaking any laws. Shut it, the older one barked. I'll decide what's legal. Then he turned back to Keanu, who was still sitting calmly, hands visible, gaze steady. You got 10 seconds to get out. Keanu didn't move. Not because he was defiant, but because something in him had gone quiet. Not angry, not afraid. Just still. Then he reached into his jacket again. Both cops tensed instantly, but Keanu didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out his phone. The older cop snapped. Put that away, right now. But Keanu's fingers moved with calm precision. 1 touch, 2. Then he held the phone to his ear and said just 4 words, I need your help. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make a scene, but something in the way he said it, the peace, the certainty, made the entire room fall silent. The officers looked confused, annoyed, but they didn't stop him. Then Keanu looked up at them and said quietly, You should wait outside. A call's being made. And it's not going to go the way you think. The older officer laughed. Oh, you think we're scared of some Hollywood call? Keanu didn't respond. He just set the phone down gently on the table. Screen up. The call still active. A few moments passed. Then the diner's front door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped in. He didn't look like he belonged in a place like this. Sleek, polished, and radiating authority. Behind him came 2 others. Quiet but equally serious. The suit walked over to booth 7, looked at Keanu, then at the officers. Mr. Reeves, he said respectfully. Are these the men? Keanu nodded once. The man turned to the officers. You've made a grave mistake. The older cop laughed. And who are you supposed to be? I'm the man your chief reports to, he said coldly. And in the next 30 minutes, your careers will take a turn neither of you are prepared for. The room froze. The younger cop turned pale, but the older one just stared at Keanu. You set us up. Keanu shook his head. No, I just asked for help. The man in the suit turned to Clara. Ma'am, would you be willing to provide a statement? We'll handle the rest. She nodded slowly, still stunned. Yes, I will. As the officers were escorted out, the younger one glanced back. There was something in his eyes. Shame, confusion, and maybe even regret. Keanu picked up his coffee again, took a slow sip, and stared out the window. The diner returned to silence. But under that silence was something brewing. A storm that had just begun. And what happened next would not only change lives, it would reveal truths no one was ready to face. Headlines, heartbeats, and hidden truths. By the time the sun began to rise over the quiet highway, the sleepy diner that once saw only truckers and tired waitresses had become the center of something much bigger. A story no one expected, and a truth far more powerful than the cameras that would soon arrive to exploit it. The officers were gone, but their actions had already left a scar, not just on the diner's worn-out floor, but in the soul of everyone who had witnessed what happened. Clara, the waitress, sat behind the counter, gripping her apron with shaky hands, her mind replaying every second of the confrontation, every word spoken and unspoken. Keanu, however, remained still in booth 7, untouched by the chaos he had quietly dismantled with 1 phone call. Yet inside, something else churned. Not anger, not satisfaction, but sorrow. Deep sorrow. Outside, 2 sleek black vehicles waited, engines still running. One belonged to the man in the suit, a former federal liaison who had owed Keanu a favor, not for fame, but for something far more personal. A moment years ago when Keanu had paid for his daughter's surgery without ever revealing his name. Now that favor had been returned, yet Keanu didn't rise to leave. Not yet. He wasn't finished, not with his coffee, not with the memory that had brought him here, and certainly not with what he had come to face. In the far corner of the diner, Clara finally found her voice. She walked back to booth 7, slowly, cautiously, her eyes still wide with disbelief. You really are him, aren't you? She asked, barely above a whisper. I thought you looked familiar, but I figured. What would a man like you be doing here? Keanu looked up from his coffee and gave her a soft, almost sad smile. It's not the kind of place people expect to see me, I guess, but for her, this was sacred ground. Clara frowned slightly, then sat across from him, uninvited, but not unwelcome. Her? Keanu nodded, his gaze drifting toward the fogged-up window. My sister, Sam. He paused, and for a moment the strong exterior cracked. This was her favorite diner. When we were young and poor and life was loud, this was our quiet place. We used to ride out here on Sundays, order the cheapest thing on the menu, and sit in this very booth. She said the pancakes here were magic. They don't fix life, but they sure make it taste better, she'd say. Clara's eyes softened. Where is she now? Keanu looked down at his coffee. Gone. Cancer took her. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't kind. But through it all, she never stopped smiling. Not once. Even in the end, she asked me to come back here once a year. To remember her. To keep the tradition alive. So I do. Quietly. Without cameras or crowds. Just me in a booth that still smells like maple syrup and old leather. Clara's voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I really am. And I'm sorry about what those officers did. They had no right. Keanu shook his head. They had fear, and fear has a way of turning people into something they're not. I don't hate them, but they needed to be stopped before that fear hurt someone who couldn't make a phone call like I can. Clara nodded slowly, the weight of his words pressing gently against her chest. You didn't have to do it, though. You could have walked away. Most people would have. Keanu looked at her, and there was no bitterness in his eyes. Only clarity. Sometimes doing the right thing means staying when it's easier to leave. Meanwhile, outside the diner, the media had arrived like wolves to a fresh trail. Flashing cameras, reporters yelling questions, microphones thrust toward every direction. Someone had leaked the incident, perhaps the younger cop, perhaps a witness, and now the internet was ablaze. Keanu Reeves racially profiled at roadside diner. Actor humiliated by police. Makes one call and ends their careers. Hashtags were already trending. Social media exploded in outrage. Some called it another example of systemic abuse. Others doubted the story entirely, thinking it was a publicity stunt. But none of them knew the truth. Not yet. Inside the diner, Keanu finally stood, stretching his legs after hours in the booth. He placed a generous tip on the table, a $100 bill folded neatly beneath his coffee cup, and nodded at Clara. Thank you for the coffee. And the quiet. Will you be okay? She asked, the worry in her voice unmistakable. He smiled. I've seen worse, survived worse, besides there's still more to do. He stepped out into the morning light where the cameras waited. Flashes blinded him for a moment. Voices shouted questions. Mr. Reeves, did the officers know who you were when they approached you? Keanu, are you going to press charges? Keanu, are you going to make a statement about police misconduct? He raised a hand, not in anger or command, but in peace. The crowd hushed instantly, sensing something different, something deeper. This isn't about me, he said softly. It's not about being famous or being wronged. This is about fear, about dignity, and about how easy it is to forget that every person, no matter how they look, where they're from, or how quiet they are, deserves respect. The reporters fell silent. Keanu continued. I don't want revenge. I want change. Not through shouting or threats, but through awareness and compassion. I'm not here to cancel anyone. I'm here to remind people that kindness is still stronger than power. He walked past the cameras, past the flashing lights and back to the car that had been waiting for him. But just as he opened the door, he paused and looked back. At the diner, at Clara, at the town that had become part of a story far bigger than it ever intended to be. Then something strange happened. A young woman ran toward him from the crowd. She was crying, holding a small photograph in her hands. Security tried to stop her, but Keanu raised his hand. She reached him, breathless and trembling. My brother, she whispered. He died last year. Overdose. He loved your movies. Said they gave him hope. Said if you could survive all that pain and still smile, maybe he could too. Keanu looked at the photo. The boy in it had kind eyes and a fragile smile. He used to say you were proof that good people still exist, she said, wiping her tears. He wanted to meet you. He never got the chance. Keanu didn't speak. Instead, he stepped forward and hugged her, not as a celebrity, not as a hero, but as a human being. She sobbed into his shoulder, and for that brief moment, everything around them faded. The cameras, the noise, the questions. Only the pain, the love, and the quiet truth remained. When the hug ended, Keanu handed her something from his pocket, a small silver token with an angel engraved on it. This was my sister's. I think he'd want you to have it, to remember him, and to keep going. She nodded, tears pouring freely. As he finally got into the car and it pulled away, the crowd stood in silence. Not out of shock or fandom, but out of respect, for in that moment, they weren't looking at a movie star. They were looking at a man who had quietly turned pain into purpose. And somewhere, far beyond the lights and headlines, the real story had just begun. The letter beneath the floorboards, diner was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet that had existed before. It was heavier now, like the air itself carried the memory of everything that had happened. The confrontation, the cameras, the trembling girl with the photograph. Outside, the parking lot had mostly cleared, the reporters driven away by the sudden shift in narrative. They had come expecting a scandal, a public meltdown, a celebrity lashing out. But Keanu had given them none of that. Instead, he offered a message they weren't ready for, one of compassion, humility, and grace. And so, unable to twist it into clickbait, most of them simply left. But not everyone. Inside the diner, Clara stood at booth 7, staring at the half-empty coffee cup Keanu had left behind. It was cold now, the steam long gone. But for her, it still held warmth, not from the coffee itself, but from what the moment represented. She had worked here for 34 years, served thousands of people, heard countless stories. But never had she witnessed anything like what she had seen today. Never had she felt so shaken, or so awakened. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. "Ma'am, excuse me." She turned and found herself looking at the younger officer. He had come back alone, his hands in his jacket pockets, his expression clouded with something that wasn't guilt exactly. More like grief. He looked like a man who had seen a truth too big to ignore, and now he didn't know what to do with it. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he said quietly. Not just to him. To you too. I should have stopped him. I should have spoken up sooner. Clara studied him. He couldn't have been more than 28. His badge still looked too shiny, his posture too stiff, like he hadn't yet grown into the role. And now he looked like a kid who had seen a hero fall and realized he'd helped push. "What's your name?" Clara asked. "Officer Jake Ellison," he replied. She nodded slowly. "You want coffee?" He blinked. Yeah. I'd like that." She poured him a cup and set it down in booth 7. He hesitated before sitting there, almost as if it felt sacred now. And maybe it was. The booth had been part of something bigger, a quiet kind of reckoning, and he was here trying to understand what it all meant. As he sipped the coffee, Clara leaned on the counter and studied him. "What made you come back?" Jake sighed. The look in his eyes. He didn't get mad. He didn't threaten us. He just made that call. Like he'd done this before. Like he knew people would listen, not because he was famous, but because he carried something deeper. I don't know. I've never seen that kind of calm. It shook me. Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. He's lost a lot. Maybe that's what makes him so steady. His sister, Jake said quietly. I heard him mention her. She used to come here? Clara nodded. She did. Back when they were kids. Came every Sunday, always asked for booth 7. Jake looked around. This place. It's small. It's falling apart. Why here? You don't always love places because they're perfect, Clara said softly. Sometimes it's the imperfection that feels real. Jake was quiet for a long time, sipping slowly. Then he looked at the wooden floor beneath his feet. I was thinking of quitting. After what happened, I thought maybe I didn't deserve to wear the badge. Clara walked around the counter and sat opposite him. Maybe you don't. Not yet. But the fact that you're asking the question, that means there's still hope. Jake looked at her, surprised. You think I should stay? I think you need to decide who you're going to be when no one's watching, she said. And if you can figure that out, then maybe the badge will mean something again. He nodded slowly. Then something strange happened. He leaned down, adjusting his foot, and felt a soft, hollow tap beneath the booth. His brow furrowed. That's weird. What is? The floor. It's loose right here. Clara stood, curious now. Huh. We've had problems with rot in that section for years. Maybe a plank finally gave out. Jake knelt and pried up the loose board gently. To their surprise, there was a small envelope tucked underneath, aged and sealed in plastic. Clara picked it up carefully, her hands trembling. On the envelope were 4 words written in faded ink. For Keanu, when I'm gone. They stared at it in silence. It's from her, Clara whispered. It has to be. His sister. Jake asked, his voice hushed. Clara nodded. She must have left it the last time they came here together. Must have known she wouldn't make it back. Maybe she asked someone to hide it, or maybe she did it herself when no one was looking. Jake stood back as Clara opened the envelope with gentle fingers. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. She opened it slowly and began to read, tears forming almost immediately. Dear Keanu, if you're reading this, then it means I couldn't keep my promise. I always said we'd grow old together and sit in this booth with white hair and terrible jokes. I guess life had other plans. But that doesn't mean you're alone. Not ever. You were always the quiet one, the thoughtful one. I was the chaos, the color, the storm. But you were my calm, my anchor. You saved me 1,000 times in ways you never realized. Every time I cried, you made me laugh. Every time I doubted, you believed. And now it's my turn to give you something back. A piece of me. A memory that won't fade. This diner. It's not just a place, it's a heartbeat. And I want you to come here every year and remember not how I died, but how we lived. The pancakes, the laughs, the way the sunlight hit the window just right in the mornings. That's where I'll be. Right here. In the booth. In the syrup. In the creak of the floor. And Keanu, keep being you. Even when the world forgets what kindness looks like, be the one who remembers. You were always my hero. Now be someone else's. Love always, Sam. Clara wiped her eyes as she finished reading. Jake said nothing, he didn't need to. The silence between them was sacred now. Not empty, but full of something real. We have to get this to him, Clara said, her voice breaking. Jake nodded. I know where he's staying. The liaisons team left an address for legal contact. I'll take it to him myself. Clara folded the letter gently, placing it back into the envelope. Be careful with it. That's a piece of his soul you're holding. As Jake left the diner, letter in hand, the sky above began to darken with approaching rain. The streets were quiet, the wind soft. But somewhere in a hotel room not far away, a man sat alone staring at a silver token in his hand, unaware that the last words of someone he loved were on their way to him. Words that would break him, open and maybe heal something deeper than time could reach. The man from her painting. The rain began gently, a whisper on the windows of the city, as if the sky itself was trying not to disturb the stillness that had taken hold inside Keanu's hotel room. He sat in the center of the suite, not on the couch or the bed, but on the floor, cross-legged and silent. The room around him was spotless, untouched, as if he had entered not to sleep or rest, but to sit in stillness and feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The events at the diner, the faces of the officers, the girl with the photograph, they all floated in his mind like drifting pieces of a larger truth. And now, something new was on its way, something unexpected, something from the past that had waited hidden beneath wood and dust for the right moment to be seen. A knock came at the door, 3 short taps. Keanu stood slowly. Not cautious, not hurried. He opened the door to find Jake standing there, soaked in rain, holding a small envelope carefully wrapped in plastic. His eyes were wide, nervous, as though the weight of what he was carrying had finally registered in full. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Keanu stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. Jake crossed the threshold, removed his cap, and held the envelope out. "They found it under the floorboard," he said quietly. "Your sister. She left this for you. Clara thought you should have it right away." Keanu took the envelope, his fingers brushing the faded handwriting. The moment he saw her name, the breath caught in his chest like a fist had gripped his lungs. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he sat down, the envelope resting in his lap like a sacred object. He looked at Jake, who stood awkwardly near the door, unsure if he should stay or leave. "Sit," Keanu said gently. Jake nodded and sat in the chair across from him. Keanu opened the envelope, his hands steady despite the emotion gathering behind his eyes. As he read the letter, the one Clara had already seen, his expression shifted from sadness to a soft, aching wonder. It was like hearing her voice again. Every word, every line, felt like sunlight through a fog he hadn't realized had covered his life since she passed. When he reached the end, he exhaled deeply, folded the letter, and looked up at Jake. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, but rich with meaning. "She used to say that grief isn't the absence of love. It's the proof that love was real, and that if something breaks you, it also means it once held you together." Jake said nothing, but his throat tightened. Keanu stood, walked to the window, and stared at the city below. "I've tried to live my life quietly, no scandals, no drama, just work, give, and stay grounded. But sometimes the universe doesn't let you hide. It calls you to something even if you don't want the attention." He turned back toward Jake. "You came back. Most people wouldn't." Jake shifted, ashamed. "I let him do it. I let him escalate. I knew it was wrong." I froze. "Fear does that," Keanu said. "But the choice to come back, to take responsibility, that's rare. You've got something in you, something worth building on." Jake's eyes glistened, but he blinked it back. "Thank you." Then another knock came. This time it was softer. Hesitant. Keanu glanced at Jake, then opened the door again. A woman stood there, mid-40s, soaked like Jake had been, but with an odd stillness in her eyes. She had a painter's satchel over one shoulder, a folded umbrella in one hand, and a canvas wrapped in plastic in the other. Her hair was pulled back, but several strands clung to her face, and the way she looked at Keanu was not the look of a fan or stranger. It was something else, something deeper. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "My name is Marin. I knew your sister." Keanu didn't move, didn't blink. Marin continued. "She painted something before she died. She told me to bring it to you when the time felt right. I didn't know when that would be, until I saw the news last night." She held out the canvas. "This belongs to you." Keanu took it gently. He brought it inside, set it on the table, and carefully unwrapped the plastic. Jake stood silently to the side, unsure whether to stay, but frozen by the intimacy of what he was witnessing. The painting was soft and dreamlike, but unmistakably real. It was the diner. Not as it looked now, but as it had been years ago. And in the painting, Booth 7 was occupied. A younger version of Keanu sat on one side, and on the other, a girl with short hair and eyes full of mischief. Sam. They were laughing. Her hand was on his wrist, and the sunlight through the window had been captured with such precision, it felt like warmth poured out of the canvas. But there was someone else in the painting, someone Keanu didn't recognize. A man, older than them, kind-eyed, seated at the counter, staring at them from across the room. Keanu turned to Maren, his voice almost breaking. "Who is he?" Maren stepped forward. That was her friend, her first love. She never told you because she didn't want to complicate your friendship. But he used to come with her sometimes. Never sat at the table, just watched from a distance. She said he reminded her of everything good, and that he reminded her of you. Keanu sat down, overwhelmed. "He died in a car crash," Maren said softly. "Before she was diagnosed, she never got to say goodbye. So she painted this, to bring the memory of him into the place she cherished most." Keanu looked back at the canvas. "And she wanted me to have it?" Maren nodded. She said, "When the world shows him its ugliness, give him this. Remind him that love outlives pain, and that beauty survives memory." Jake turned his head, trying not to let the tears fall. Maren stood quietly, giving space. And Keanu just stared, not in silence but in reverence. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. And in that moment, the man who had lived through loss, through pain, through the weight of a world constantly asking him to be more, found something he hadn't realized he was still missing. Closure, but more than that, a reason to begin something new. The world waits, but he goes back the morning after Keanu received the painting. The world outside his hotel had changed, but not in the quiet way change usually comes. It had roared overnight like a storm unbottled. His act of kindness, his composure at the diner, the moment with the grieving girl and the silver angel, all of it had been captured, circulated, dissected, and held up like a mirror to a world, desperately searching for something real. News channels ran segments not just about the event, but about the kind of man who responds to humiliation not with wrath, but with grace. Blogs filled with emotional essays. Strangers posted artwork, songs, poems, and letters addressed to Booth 7. Hashtags calling for kindness trended globally, and in the middle of all that noise, Keanu remained still, untouched, unmoved by the chaos of the world reacting to him, because his heart wasn't in the headlines. It was back at a booth in a fading diner on a forgotten highway, with ghosts who still smiled in the sunlight. Keanu stood at the window of the hotel, watching the rain wash over the glass like tears falling in slow motion. Behind him, the painting sat propped on a chair, the canvas still wrapped in the soft light of memory. The figure at the counter, the man he never knew, the one who had quietly loved his sister, now lingered in his thoughts, like a question that had no answer. Who was he? Why did she never speak of him? What did they share that even he, her closest companion, had not seen? There was a knock on the suite door. Maren entered quietly, holding a small notebook in her hands. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had cried all the tears she needed and now had only truth left to share. "I found this in Sam's studio," she said, placing the notebook on the table. She wrote in it during the last few months. "I wasn't going to give it to you at first, it felt too personal. But now I think it's meant for you." Keanu opened it slowly, his fingers running over the pages like they were made of something more fragile than paper. The handwriting was hers, flowing, a little messy, but warm and alive. Each page was filled with thoughts she had never spoken, fears she had buried, and memories she had polished like stones she wanted to leave behind. March 12, I saw the man from the diner in my dream again. He was sitting at the counter watching us laugh. Keanu was telling that story about the bicycle thief. The man smiled but never said anything, just watched like he was holding something he couldn't give. Maybe love is like that sometimes, not something you receive, something you witness. March 27, I'm scared, not of dying, of forgetting. Forgetting the sound of his laugh, forgetting the way the pancakes used to smell, forgetting how Keanu looked at me when I was strong and not just sick. If I lose those things, then who am I? April 9, I asked Marin to hide the painting in the diner. Not for drama, not for mystery, but because I wanted him to find it when he needed it most. Not when I died, not at my funeral, but when the world turned cruel and cold and made him question who he was. I want him to sit in that booth, see my face, see that painting, and remember, he's still the best person I've ever known. Keanu closed the notebook slowly. His eyes were wet, but no tears fell. Not yet. He just sat in silence, the weight of those words filling the space between memory and truth. Marin placed a hand on his shoulder. She didn't want you to carry her, she said softly. She wanted you to carry forward. Outside, the world waited. More interviews had been requested. Networks had offered to pay millions for exclusives. There were talk, show invitations, offers for documentaries, foundations wanting him as their ambassador, schools asking him to speak. But in that moment, Keanu made a decision that no one expected. The kind of decision that never makes front-page headlines but changes lives in quieter ways. He packed a single bag, not filled with suits or gear, but with books, the notebook, the letter, and a copy of the painting. Then he stepped into the hall where Jake was waiting with the car. "You ready?" Jake asked. "Not for the city," Keanu replied. "I'm going back." "Back where?" Keanu looked him in the eye. "To the diner." 2 hours later, the car pulled up to the small lot outside Clara's diner. The rain had faded into a soft mist, and the sign above the entrance flickered, with the same stubborn glow it had carried for decades. Inside, the booths were empty, the counter polished, the scent of coffee and syrup lingering like memory. Clara was wiping a glass when she looked up and saw him. She froze for a moment, unsure if she was dreaming. Then she smiled, slowly and deeply, as if a lost page of her life had been returned. "You came back?" she said. Keanu nodded. "I'm not done." He walked to booth 7 and sat down. This time he wasn't alone. Jake followed and sat across from him, still awkward but learning how to just be present. Marin took the booth behind, placing her bag beside her. And then, one by one, others arrived. A man with his daughter. They had driven from 3 states away because the girl had made a school project about heroes who choose kindness. A teacher who brought a class of students to eat pancakes and write about empathy. A man who had once been homeless, now working, wearing a clean shirt, and holding a folded newspaper where Keanu's photo was printed beside the words, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some just hold the door open." Soon the diner was full. Not loud, not chaotic, just full of people, of warmth, of something almost holy. Keanu stood and addressed them not like a celebrity, but like a friend. He told them about Sam, about the booth, about the letter and the painting. He didn't make it dramatic. He didn't perform. He just spoke. And every word felt like a thread sewing something broken back together. He ended by saying, "If this booth could speak, it would tell you that life is short, but love isn't. It would say that the greatest strength is in how we treat each other when no one's watching, and that kindness is never wasted." The room was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the moment didn't need words. Afterward, Clara brought him a fresh plate of pancakes, the same kind Sam had always ordered. Keanu took one bite and closed his eyes, and for a second, just one quiet second, he felt like she was there beside him. Not in memory, not in grief, but in joy. And for the first time in years, he let himself cry. Not out of sorrow, but out of peace. The booth that never emptied weeks had passed since the diner had become more than just a place. It had become a living memory, a quiet beacon in a loud world, and the heartbeat of a movement that no one could fully explain, but everyone could feel. Something had changed, not just in those who had witnessed what happened that day, but in the thousands who had watched, read, and felt it from afar. And at the center of it all was a booth, booth 7, where the smell of syrup lingered like a familiar song and the light through the window still fell just right, as if time paused there on purpose. Keanu came back often, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Every visit wasn't a tribute, it was a return to something deeper than grief, more powerful than legacy. He no longer came alone. Every time he sat there, someone new joined him. A veteran with a broken heart, a teenager who felt invisible, a writer chasing one good story, a single mother working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, and he listened. Not as a celebrity, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who knew how it felt to hurt and still hope. And in doing so, he gave those around him something rare, the feeling of being seen without being judged. Jake, the young officer who had once stood silent during an injustice, had resigned from the force, not in disgrace but with purpose. It wasn't a decision made in guilt but in clarity. He said he had seen the job from both sides, what it was and what it could be. And now he wanted to help rebuild something better. So he returned to the town, enrolled in social justice training, and began speaking to cadets, not with lectures but with stories. Stories about choices, silence, and the courage it takes to come back and do things right. People listened, not because he was loud, but because he spoke like someone who had changed from the inside. Clara, the longtime waitress, had become the keeper of the booth. She had always been there, pouring coffee and stories, but now she had become something more. People came from all over just to meet her, the woman who stood up, who remembered, who carried the kind of wisdom that can't be taught. She never asked for money, fame, or praise. She just kept pouring, kept listening, and kept telling everyone the same thing. Kindness is never wasted, especially on those who need it most. And then there was Marin, the artist who had delivered the painting and opened the final door into Sam's heart. After the story broke, she was contacted by several galleries. She turned them all down. Instead, she started a small community project in honor of Sam, teaching children and young adults how to use painting to express what they couldn't say out loud. The project was called Light Through the Window, and its mission was simple: to help people remember that art, like kindness, could transform pain into beauty. But it was Keanu who made the most unexpected decision of all. One rainy afternoon, just like the one when it all began, he walked into the diner carrying a small folder. Clara was behind the counter. Jake was sweeping the floor. Marin had just finished helping a local girl paint her first portrait. The place was alive, soft, and steady. Keanu sat at booth 7, opened the folder, and laid it on the table. Inside were documents, real estate transfers, renovation plans, non-profit licensing forms. "What's this?" Clara asked, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. Keanu looked at her with quiet resolve. "I bought the building, not just the diner, the entire block." Jake turned from the broom. "You did what?" Keanu nodded. "This place has become something bigger, and I don't want it to fade just because time moves on, so I'm turning it into something permanent. The diner stays, of course, untouched. But we're adding a reading room, a small stage for storytelling, a studio for painting classes, and a center for grief and trauma support. No red carpet, no press, just healing, memory, connection." Clara blinked back tears. "You're turning it into her dream, aren't you?" Keanu smiled softly. "I'm turning it into all of ours." The news never made the front page. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because it wasn't designed to go viral. No one was humiliated. No one was canceled. No scandal fueled the headlines. Just quiet work, quiet progress, and a quiet man using what he had not to glorify himself, but to lift others. And so, the diner transformed. Not quickly, but carefully. It was never flashy. The floors still creaked. The coffee still tasted like yesterday. But now, every table held a story. Every wall carried a memory. Every booth had become a confessional, a sanctuary, and a beginning. Booth 7, however, was never touched. It remained exactly as it was. Same table, same seat, same view. A small plaque was placed above the window, simple and unadorned. It read, "In loving memory of Sam, where kindness began and never ended." People came from around the country, just to sit in that booth. They didn't take selfies. They didn't live stream. They sat, quietly, thoughtfully. Some cried, some smiled. Some just closed their eyes and breathed. One winter morning, years later, a young boy walked into the diner with his father. They ordered pancakes and sat by the window. The boy pointed to the booth and asked, "Why do people cry there?" The father looked over, smiled, and said, "Because someone loved someone else so much they never stopped showing up." "Do you think they're still here?" the boy asked. The father nodded. "In every kind word, in every full plate, in every time someone decides to do the right thing even when no one's watching. Yeah, I think they're here." And in that moment, just outside the diner, the sun broke through the clouds. And the light, just like always, fell perfectly across booth 7, the same way it always had when a brother and sister used to laugh over pancakes, when memory still walked beside them, and when the world, for one fragile second, remembered how powerful it could be to simply be kind.